Selim yielded to the remonstrances and entreaties of the Mansite Greeks, and to the urgent advice of his best counsellors, so far as to abstain from the slaughter of the Rayas which he had intended. Still he refused to suffer the finest churches of Constantinople to be used any longer by the Christians. They were changed into mosques, but inferior structures of wood were built in their stead, and the ruinous churches were repaired by Selim's orders, so that apparent respect might be paid to the grant of liberties from his great ancestor to the Greeks. Chapter 9. Importance of the epoch of Suleiman's reign, his character, joy at his accession, conquest of Belgrade and Rhodos, battle of Mohács, siege of Vienna, critical repulse of the Turks. The period comprised within the reign of Suleiman I, 1520 till 1566, is one of the most important not only in Ottoman history but in the history of the world. The great monarchies of Western Christendom had now emerged from the feudal chaos. They had consolidated their resources and matured their strength. They stood prepared for constants on a grander scale, for the exhibition of more sustained energy, and for the realization of more systematic schemes of aggrandizement than had been witnessed during the centuries which we term the age of medieval history. At the commencement of this epoch, 1520, nearly 40 years had passed away since the Ottomans had been engaged in earnest conflict with the chief powers of Central and Western Europe. The European wars of the feeble Bayezid II had been coldly waged and were directed against the minor states of Christendom, and the fierce energies of his son Selim the Inflexible had been devoted to the conquest of Mohammedan nations. During these two reigns, the great kingdoms of modern Europe had started from childhood into manhood. Spain had swept the last relics of her old Moorish conquerors from her soil, and had united the sceptres her various Christian kingdoms under the sway of a single dynasty. France, under three warlike kings, Charles VIII, Louis XII, and Francis I, had learned to employ in brilliant schemes of foreign conquest those long discordant energies and long divided resources which Louis XI had brought beneath the sole authority of the crown. In England and in the dominions of the House of Austria, similar developments of matured and concentrated power had taken place. Moreover, while the arts which enrich and adorn nations had received in Christendom. See von Hammer, Book 25. Towards the close of the 15th century, and almost unprecedented inequality impulse, the art of war had been improved three even in a higher degree. Permanent armies comprising large bodies of well-armed and well-trained infantry were now employed. The manufacture and the use of firearms, especially of artillery, were better understood and more generally practiced, and a school of skillful as well as daring commanders had arisen, trained in the wars and on the model of the great captain Gonzalo of Cordova. Besides the commencement of the struggle between France and Austria for the possession of Italy, many great events signalized the transition period from the medieval to modern history at the end of the 15th and the commencement of the 16th century, and those events, though not all strictly connected with warfare, were all of the nature calculated to awaken a more far-reaching and a more enduring heroism among the Christian nations, and to make them more formidable to their Mohammedan rivals. The great maritime discoveries and the conquests effected by the Portuguese and the Spaniards in the East Indies and the New World, the revival of classical learning, the splendid dawnings of new literatures, the impulse given by the art of printing, the Enlightenment discussion, and free inquiry, all tended to multiply and to elevate the leading spirits of Christendom, to render them daring the aspiration and patience of difficulty, and of suffering in performance. There was also reason to expect that these new energies of the Franks would find their field of action in conquest over Islam. For religious zeal had again become fervent in that age, and the advancement of the cross was the ultimate purpose of the toils of the martyr, the philosopher, and the student, as well as of the statesman and the soldier. The hope that the treasure to be derived from his voyage would serve to rescue the Holy Land from the infidels was ever present to the mind of Columbus amid his labors and his sufferings and amid the perils of the unknown deep, even as Charles the Eighth amid his marches and battlefields between the Alps and Naples still cherished the thought of proceeding from conquered Italy to the rescue of Constantinople from the Turks. The probability of a marked change in the balance of power between Christendom and Islamism before the middle of the 16th century may seem to have been materially increased by the fact that one Christian sovereign combined many of the most powerful states under his single rule. The Emperor Charles V reigned over an empire equal to that of Charlemagne in space, and immeasurable, surpassing it in wealth and strength. He had inherited the Netherlands, the Austrian states, and the united Spanish monarchy, with the fair kingdoms of Naples and Sicily. He obtained the election of imperial throne of Germany, and Cortes and Pizarro gave him the additional transatlantic empires of Mexico and Peru, with their almost countless supplies of silver and gold. It might perhaps have been foreseen that the possessor of his immense power would be trammeled when employing it against the Ottomans by the ambitious rivalry of France and by the religious dissensions of Germany. But on the other hand, the Ottoman Empire was at least in an equal degree impeded from full action against Christendom by the imperial rivalry of Persia, by the hatred of Shiite against Sunnite, and by the risk of revolt in Syria and Egypt. Yet the House of Ottoman not only survived this period of peril, but was lord of the ascendant throughout the century, and saw numerous and fair provinces torn from the Christians, and heaped together to increase its already ample dominions. Much unquestionable of this success was due to the yet unimpaired vigor of the Turkish military institutions, to the high national spirit of the people, and to the advantageous position of their territory. But the principal cause of the Ottoman greatness throughout his epoch was the fact that the empire was ruled by a great man. Great not merely through his being called on the act amid combinations of favoring circumstances, not merely by tact in the discerning and energy in carrying out the spirit of his age, but a man great in himself, an intelligent ordainer of the present, and a self-inspired molder of the future.